Welcome to Rewiring Health, where you'll find a combination of science and spirituality to reclaim your health and realize your worth. I'm your host, Kelly Kessler, and I'm on a mission to help you stop self-abandoning and start embracing yourself. Join me as we dive into heart-centered, authentic conversations that not only will inspire you, but help you unlock a whole new perspective. You are here for a reason. Now let's dive in. We deeply desire a sense of connection and a sense of belonging with ourselves and others. But yet we get into these patterns where we feel like we're just reacting to what's going on in life, feeling like we're always just trying to compensate for something, to feel like we're enough. And yet there's something that's going on deeper in the surface. It's these beliefs that we have about ourselves and the world. And that is why I'm so grateful to have JF Benoist on the podcast today. In this episode, we dive deep into understanding ourselves better, how we can start to transform the way we approach ourselves and approach relationships, and really allow ourselves to move through life with a deeper sense of connection. This was such a transformational conversation. I'm so grateful to have him on the podcast today. JF Benoist, best-selling author of Addicted to the Monkey Mind and A Vive la Vie, An Adventure in Belonging, is a pioneer in mental health and emotional well-being. With decades of experience and his innovative experiential engagement therapy, JF transforms how we understand connection and self-worth. JF delivers fresh, actionable insights into overcoming anxiety, breaking free from self-sabotaging habits, and fostering genuine connection. His relatable stories and practical tools inspire audiences to embrace their true selves and create a life of belonging. I am so grateful for this conversation with JF, and in this, we dive into so many ways that you can start to allow yourself to feel more connected with yourself and others and really transform how you approach life and live with more flow and more grace. All right, well, welcome JF Benoist onto the podcast today. I am so honored to have you on today.
I'm really excited to be with you today, Kelly.
Yeah, I am so looking forward to this. And I was just saying that I just finished your book and it spoke to me in so many ways. So I can't wait to dive in and really talk about something that impacts us so deeply. And the characters in your book are so relatable. And there are two in particular that really spoke to me, Kenta and Nolan, and I could see myself in them. And one of the things, they struggle with are these false belongings, habits that they have. And can you talk about that? Because that is something that we all struggle with, but maybe don't realize that we are struggling with that.
Yeah, it's amazing that we can have so many ways that we behave every day without having a true understanding of where that behavior comes from. All these reactionary ways that we are in moments that we're tense or that we're having challenges with our partners, with our colleagues at work or our children. So what I've been able to recognize, I ran an addiction treatment center, holistic addiction treatment center for 15 years. And I kept talking to my therapist and saying, look, are you recognizing that there are patterns that repeat themselves, right? And they had difficulty recognizing them because I started to notice that in order to recognize those patterns, we have to kind of be a little bit like a dog on a bone, which is kind of a quality that I have. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, wait, that happened last time. It's happening again. It's repeating itself.
Yeah.
So what I've been able to identify is that there are six primary, what I call those false belonging habits that really dominate us because the way we were raised. It really comes from our conditioning, from the way our parents treated us, the way our, society treats us. And so we adapt these ways in wanting to belong, really. That's the goal, is that we want to feel like we're part of the tribe. And
Mhm.
so ultimately we adapt, right? So the first one is the most common one is the performance, which is, it's like you could just think of, you come from school, you got a bad grades, the focus goes on the grade. And so we learn that, oh, in order to be accepted, I have to perform, right? I have to deliver. And so that's the most common one. The second one is one that's oftentimes not recognized, and that is this. And it's the reason it's not recognized is because It's really sounds good on paper to be that way, which is to be serving others over your own self. So it's kind of like that comes from the mentality of being raised in ways that people say, well, don't think too much of yourself, be there for others, and then you'll belong to the tribe. But those people end up sacrificing their own needs and their own, well-being in the process. So it's very painful. The third habit is what I call pushing love away. And this is our own fear of really sort of attaching to people. And that really comes from, treatment like, why can't you be more like your brother, like your sister? It comes from, oftentimes people who have been adopted suffer from that. And so we have this tendency to keep ourselves like at a distance, like we don't want to get close to the person. And so we keep that in check and we think that that's the way that we can belong, right? Then the next one is using anxiety as a way to be responsible in life. So, meaning if I anticipate bad things, it means that I'm responsible and therefore I can like take care of things and that'll make me belong in society. And that one runs a ton of
Mhm.
people.
Yeah.
And then the last two are one that's extremely common is that relationship. And you talked about this in your last podcast, which
Mhm.
I felt really touched by, which is the relationship we have with our feelings, this
Mhm.
fear that we have this experience of, oh, yeah, I'm actually really scared right now, or I'm actually really sad, or I'm having a lot of grief. And we fear that if we have those emotions that we won't get accepted, right? We
Mhm.
won't be part of the tribe.
Mhm.
And then the
Absolutely.
last one is the one that you name, and the character is Nolan in the book. And it's that one is really crippling. And I've seen a lot of therapists struggling identifying this style of behavior because most people who are it's self-doubt, and most people who are in extreme self-doubt have this sense that if they ask you questions, so meaning you ask them a question, they'll answer your question with a question. So they keep the focus away from them
Mhm.
to make sure that they need to figure out how you see the world first, how you perceive things,
Yeah.
so that then they'll feel like, okay, if I can figure out how they want it and I kind of fit myself in that mold with them, then I'll belong. And it's so all these habits, what they all have in common is that we're denying our own experience and we have a false way of belonging that doesn't last. It's temporary. We reach it for a moment, but then it's back on the same, wheel of seeking belonging through these false belonging habits.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Thank you for describing each of those because, like, literally, I was reading your book. I'm like, some spoke to me more than others, but I could see bits of that in myself, almost every one of those traits. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, it got to me emotionally because I'm like, I've lived, most of my life not being aware of this. And then now that I've become more aware, I can look back at times in my life where this was really driving my behaviors, my thoughts, my reality. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it's like once you see it, you can't unsee it. And it's really tremendous like that you share these because it was really eye-opening and what I really appreciate is you sharing the characters because you can understand the concepts but like I could relate to the characters so much and really hearing their stories and you can see how this really does integrate into so many aspects of our lives. So
Hmm. Well,
really
thank you for noticing that because I've received a lot of this similar feedback that you're saying right now. I think the main goal that I had with the book is to demonstrate it instead of trying to teach it.
yeah.
And because that's when we really absorb it, we need to have an experience. And
Yep.
so these false belonging habit come through really they come alive because they come through characters who we can identify with, right? Where we can feel like, oh my gosh, I'm just like Kenta, and I'm
Mhm.
I'm like
Yes.
Nolan, I'm like Imani,
Yep, totally. And it's like, yeah, getting through the book, I was like, I want to go hang out with all of them. It's like you feel so like drawn to this group because you're like, you get me, like you understand what it's like to live like that, because we put on this external persona of like everything is fine, but we only know what's going on the inside. And that's like, so I really feel like it conveyed so much of like the internal struggle that we all, have in different ways of showing up in the world and trying to function, but yet also trying to keep ourselves whole within ourselves. And
Mm, yeah,
yeah, it's
yeah.
such a challenge. And one thing that really stood out to me was the story you shared with the first two characters, Kenta and then Rowan.
Amani,
So
Rowan.
Rowan, yeah, their backstories of seeing how they were being parented and then how that played a role. Can you talk about that? Because as I was reading it, I'm a parent of two young boys, and I'm very aware of like, okay, like how am I influencing them? What are some things that they might be challenged with, and what are some things that I'm not aware of? Can you talk about how, as a parent, we can really make sure that we're doing the best we can to not, have them maybe be more of like a Rowan and not like maybe the other characters?
Yeah, absolutely. And the beautiful aspect of being a human being is that we all crave connection.
Mhm,
And we don't realize that the way we function oftentimes is compromising the connection. And there are two levels of connection. There's the connection with myself, which, because we are feeling creatures, that connection is an emotional connection. It's how am I with my emotional body? Okay.
mhm,
And then that connection with others emotionally as well, right?
mhm,
So in the book, I describe how we are raised in a world of correction. And
mhm,
what that means is, right, initially the corrections were for survival. So when you're really young, you're told not to put your finger in the electrical outlet, you're told not to put your hand on the stove, and all of this is for survival reasons, and it needs to be in place, right? But then
mhm,
slowly what these corrections starts to attack our character. And they're
mhm,
about like, like we want to belong, which makes sense. Like you wouldn't want your child to go to a friend's house and eat food and just drip food out of their mouth as they're, eating food, right? So
mhm.
there's certain of those that make sense. But what
Yeah.
we don't realize is that we start having judgmental ways in which we think we need to conform, and we're prioritizing those behaviors, like the way we dress, the way we look, the way our grades are, the way. So there's all these things that as adults make sense that we want our kids to succeed in the world. So we want to show them that if they do this way, like if they have good grades, then their chances of succeeding, is greater. That
Mhm,
makes sense, okay? But what we don't realize is the price that we pay for focusing on the behavior first is
mhm,
that the self-confidence of our children is going down the tubes.
mhm,
So, for an example of that could be just, I mean, if we take the example of the grade,
mhm,
think of how many of us were raised in a way where the parents immediately goes to the topic of talking about the grades, right?
mhm,
So I notice now your grades are slippery, you're slipping, you're hanging out with some friends that I don't think are good influence. And so we want to solve the problem, which makes sense, but we are not paying attention to how the kid is feeling.
mhm,
And it's completely different if we learn to reverse this, meaning we go to the behavior second and we go to the connection first. So
mhm,
imagine, like, and this is what's unique about Rowan in the book that's such an incredible role model, because he's raised by a mother who prioritizes connection no matter what. That's really what she does, right? And we see that in the beginning stories, right? So imagine shifting, and it's not easy because we're so conditioned to wanting to make sure that we succeed, that we fix the problems, that we find solutions, right? And yet the connection is going to solve all these problems. Meaning, if I say to my kid, "Are you okay? Tell me what's going on. I'm noticing that your grades are going down, and I really care about you. Like you're important to me." Now the nervous system is receiving a message that's like, oh, like I'm important, like more than my grades. Yeah, like you are, right? And so deep down over time, because we were raised in this way of correction, which again is not like, I don't encourage anyone to blame their parents for this or to blame society, but just to develop awareness that we now function that way with ourselves. We have a habit of correcting ourselves in our own heads, and all these, six, false belonging habits, they're forms of correction. And that if we simply learn to shift into connection, and connection mode is about attuning to our emotional body and attuning to other people's emotional body. It's absolutely mind-blowing how our lives become completely exactly what we want it to be, right?
Mhm.
We want to feel and experience genuine love, genuine, you know, uh, value, that we are valuable and that others are valuable just the way they are.
Mhm. Yeah. Oh my gosh, absolutely. And even just like, reading through that and hearing you speak, it's like you can feel that, it's like, yes, that is what we all are craving. And I feel like we get kind of bounced around in the survival mode of just like the demand of more and more and more. And it's like having
Mhm.
that connection and feeling like we can come back to ourselves is so relieving and reprieving in this world where we feel like we're always trying to just prove ourselves. And yeah.
Isn't that stunning how this is something that even today in my life, I pay attention every day. When I was writing the book, I was thinking to myself, it is more important to live it than to actually write it.
Mhm.
And I kept feeling that in my bones, like,
Yeah.
yeah, this is a way of living that is about prioritizing connection, which means that my experience matters and the experience of my wife, my children, my colleagues is important, right? And when we learn to like prioritize those really important experiences that we're having, what begins to change is that we're no longer following a mode of operating that is an ideal of who we should be, but
Mhm.
it becomes, oh, this is actually the experience I'm having, you know?
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
and I can give you some example like how this actually functions in our lives, and it's the relationship between the mind and the body. Okay.
Mhm.
So a simple example could be, if a partner comes home and says to their partner, says, I'm really frustrated. You missed taking the trash yesterday, right? And now it's gone. Now we have to deal with all this trash all this week, right? So both partners have had a long day. It's 5 o'clock and one partner says that, right? Or it could be any other kind of comments, but let's just run with a simple example like that. What happens to most people in instant like that?
Get
Well,
defense.
they get
Yeah.
defensive,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And what we don't realize is the defensiveness is a narrative. So, meaning that these are thoughts that we're having. So, the first thought might be something like, gosh, my partner's so demanding. They're just, or don't they understand that I had a long day at work and that I've been stressed out and yesterday. So there's all these different thoughts that are running, okay? And these initial thoughts are the thoughts that makes us reactive. So as long as we keep following this way of thinking, which we blame others or we focus on blaming the situation or trying to solve the problem through some kind of solution or justify ourselves, okay? But none of those issues that we think are the real issue are actually what's actually happening. So in the nervous system underneath, the real emotion is an emotion of anxiety that feels, it's a feeling of like very much like if we were faced with a tiger attacking us. And it's like it used to be on a survival level that we were scared for our lives, meaning in a physical way, right? But in that moment, we have the exact same sensation in our body. It feels like we're being attacked by a tiger, which we're not. Our partner's not going to kill us, right?
Mhm.
We know that, but emotionally, it feels the same. And the reason it feels the same is because the tiger has been replaced with a sense that our value and our sense of love is in question in that moment. And imagine if we lose the connection to our own sense that we are lovable and that we are valuable, then at that point, it feels like dying. Emotionally, it feels like dying.
Mhm.
And so ultimately, if we become aware that the common denominator when we're about to be reactive, okay, is that deeper, there's an emotion that exists there that is related to my sense of love and value.
Mhm.
And that is the moment where it takes a lot of courage, right? So I'll give you an example of what it looks like in my life when I get triggered now is I follow what I talk about in the book is the three doors, okay?
Mhm.
That we can repeatedly walk through when we're about to be reactive that brings us back into connection. So the first door is to pause. So meaning pausing this narrative, being able to say to my partner, "Oh, I just noticed right now there's a lot of like anger that just rose up for me. I need to take a step back. Just give me a few minutes, okay? But I'll be back." Okay. So now there's been the comment, right, about not taking the trash the day before. So then I walk away and I go somewhere or I even walk around the block, whatever it is I need to do, and I start breathing. Okay. And when I'm breathing, now I'm beginning to connect more with my emotional body. And I let these judgments sort of take place. God, she's annoying, da 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 da, whatever it is. And I feel the initial emotion of anger, but I'm aware that this is following a narrative. And then I drop deeper into, oh, what am I really scared of? And it's like a shortcut we can do it ourselves. Like, what is really happening inside of my body? And now I can feel that I'm really scared that I'm not enough. That on
Mhm.
some level, it means that if I don't check all the boxes that my partner wants me to check, that somehow I'm less than and it's never logical. It is really just an experience in the body. And now I can bring myself to attune to that experience, to give it attention, give it like saying, wow, wow, that's really harsh to think that it makes you less than, because you didn't take the trash. And now as I'm attuning, there's something you said in your podcast yesterday that I was blown away because it aligns with how we don't understand that pain, emotional pain, lives in the present moment, and the resilient self also lives in the present moment. So,
Mhm.
meaning the person I really am, not the ideal of who I think I should be, really lives in that present moment. But when we over identify with thoughts, we disconnect from the present moment and we go into some version of who we think we should be. We experience a lot of shame, we relive trauma over and over again that we're not enough, basically. So attuning to that experience then allows us to calm down and
Mhm.
actually put in awareness, is that how we define myself right now? Is me missing taking the trash out? Does that mean, can I define who I am as a person that way? And it's completely ridiculous, right? We can actually see that it doesn't hold water, that it's like, okay. And then in that moment, I go back to my partner. And this is where I say, wow, I was really irritated when you said that. And I got really scared that somehow I wasn't enough, that I'm not doing enough.
Mhm.
And then it's like there's such a depth of connection that happens instantly because the partners, you're not no longer defending anything. You're being really honest. You're communicating something that exists at the nervous system level. And then your partner goes, oh, like usually the response will be, I had no idea that's what was going on for you. Right. But it's very rare that the debate will continue, that the arguments will continue. So this way of living is, you know, it requires a lot of courage initially because we're terrified to be that vulnerable with the people in our lives. We think that we'll die if that happens, literally.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, actually you meet that so much resistance. But like what I love about the three doors and what you share, it's like And like the visual I got from it was like, on the top of the ocean, it's a lot of like surfacey resistance, like a lot of turmoil. And that's tends to be where we keep arguments. It's like just batting back and forth on take the garbage out. You didn't take the garbage out, but it's like you talk about going deeper. And it's like deeper, there's that calmness in the ocean. And so like that's where you can really see that clarity of what's going on. So like I really appreciate you giving that example and that framework because it just gives you that moment of realizing like you have the power to transform that energy within yourself and recognize what's behind that. So it just beautiful framework. And I absolutely love that. And
There's a way we can live that is relational. And
mhm,
we've been taught to not be relational, meaning to over-identify with our thoughts, thinking that our thoughts,
mhm,
Einstein said it best. He said, you can't solve the problem from the
mhm.
same mindset that created it. And
Yeah.
that's what we do because we're over focused on the situation, on
Yeah.
fixing the problem, on, it's a mind that doesn't realize that the nervous system is in a state of distress and it
Mhm.
doesn't need more thinking because
Yeah.
more thinking aggravates the anxiety because it's not being attuned to. Just it's
Mhm.
exactly the same way when the parents keeps talking about the grades, the nervous system's never calming down in your kid. It's
Mhm.
it's actually getting more aggravated and it's building more sort of evidence that says, yeah, as long as my parents keep talking about the grade, then there must be something wrong with me. And
Mhm.
now the way I need to be in order to get their acceptance and their love is I need to perform, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And so that's where those habits are built. They become ingrained because these patterns of being treated as the behavior is more important than you
Mhm.
happens thousands and thousands of times in our lives. And it's not relational. And here's the myth that's I think is hard for most people to get over with is that we think that if we prioritize the connection, that means that the behavior won't change,
Mhm.
right? And
Mhm.
it's actually the opposite, meaning when I really bring presence to my kid and I say, are you okay? And I spend a lot of time emotionally being connected with them.
Mhm.
Afterwards, when we've had that strong connection, then we can talk about the grades. And now it's like the kid will be listening, they'll be present, and we can have a conversation about it. And we can say, what do you need? What needs to
Mhm.
change? How do you see it? And the solution actually happen naturally. They happen effortlessly.
Mhm.
So, but it's hard because in a way, I think we're all brainwashed in this obsession, right, to want to fix things.
Mhm. Absolutely.
It's
Yeah.
exhausting, really.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what was so relatable because it's just realizing how much that connection means. And like after reading your book, I've been taking more pauses and I'm like, okay, how do I approach my child in this situation differently? I was like saying to my husband, like, you have to read this because like I could see he was having some of that like disconnection and stuff like that. But what I loved about it was like you were saying, like, do this with like a safe space first, where you can be vulnerable with somebody you trust. And I have a question off of that. So with that and going through the three doors, how do you approach that with someone who maybe is like very emotionally invalidating, like a relationship where someone completely dismisses your emotion? Do you still go through that process or how do you navigate situations like that?
I'm so glad you brought that up because it's so important, right? It's an aspect that I really made sure that was part of the book, like at the end
Mhm.
where I say, okay, authentic connection and communication happens not randomly, not somehow you need to spill your guts to everybody you meet just because now you're learning to live relationally, right? So it comes with a discernment. So, meaning that being vulnerable is not something that we just randomly do with anybody. It is something that we can eventually, right? But I would say definitely in the first few years of really adjusting to living authentically and vulnerably, we have to have strong boundaries. So we have to identify some people are just not, they're just not there. They're not going to meet you there. And
Mhm.
so it's about being able to still be honest, but without having to just open up everything.
Mhm.
So I think examples of that could be, I've had some relationships where the person just doesn't have the ability to recognize my own feelings. Okay. And so at that point, I might say something like, like I've had relationships where people behave in a way where they do what they want to do, disregarded of what the impact is on other people. And when that happens, it's like expressing, having strong limits and saying, that behavior really affected me and it's just not okay with me, right? And so I don't really need to have a discussion with you around it. I just want to let you know this is where I stand, right?
Mhm.
So, and then there's no discussion, there's no trying to solve this problem or solve the issue with the person. You have to be willing, it's vulnerable to do that, actually, to have limits as well, right? To have boundaries. I think we have to also be mindful that it's not, it's again, it comes to discernment. We have to be careful that it doesn't come from a reactionary way of thinking, because that's not the same thing, right? Because who is the person, if you ask anybody, who is the person in the world that triggers you the most?
The person closest to you.
Exactly. And
Mhm.
it's just, there's no doubt, right?
No, yeah,
And so,
100%.
but, but if I ask you, is that person to be not trusted?
I think it depends. But yeah, I think it depends on the relationship. But yeah, I mean, I can think of like some of the people close to me totally trust, and then some people not, I guess that's been kind of a rift, but
Okay,
yeah,
so I'm initially starting just with, I'm not going to family members and friends.
yeah,
I'm just starting with a partner.
yeah, yeah.
Okay. So if the answer is no, if my
Hmm.
partner is not to be trusted, then the question that I would ask is, I would evaluate what you're doing in that relationship,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Because if really you don't trust your partner, then something's up.
Yeah.
Something deeper is happening, and maybe there's a dynamic, maybe there's something that the person needs to look at in their own lives.
Hmm.
But ultimately, what I'm actually saying, which I would say is probably 90% of the cases in relationships, it's not that they don't trust their partner, is that they feel triggered by their partner.
Hmm.
And being triggered is not the same as not trusting.
Hmm.
So when I'm triggered, I'm actually in a state of dysregulation where I'm actually afraid that I'm not okay on some level. And that's the most beautiful aspect of intimate relationships, is that to me, these intimate relationships are there to teach us how to open our heart. They're there to teach us how to get closer. And initially, it's not what we think it is. It's not sailing in the sunset. It's
Hmm.
not. It's actually facing those moments that are very challenging, right?
Hmm.
That it's like
Absolutely.
where we are triggered, and it takes courage. And the more we can actually go inside of ourselves and realize that we are the ones in those moments putting in question our sense of love and value, and
Hmm.
we can adjust to, oh, is that really true? Is that how I decide if I'm lovable or valuable? Is whether my partner is frustrated with me or not?
Hmm.
Then we can be authentic. We can communicate, I'm scared. It's amazing. I even remember, after years of doing this now with my partner, I remember my wife one day, she said to me, I'm noticing you're coming up to me and you're being vulnerable and it's really great. And you're saying a lot like, I'm scared. Is it always going to be that way? She asked me that question.
Hmm. Yeah.
And I laughed and I said, I took a breath and I said, what's fascinating is I've noticed that every time I say it, it's true. So it's not like a pattern or a defense mechanism. It's like I'm actually recognizing that you just asked me about five things, and I went into this state of panic inside my body, and all I did is attune to it by saying I'm scared. And so it opens a door to my nervous system.
Hmm.
And now I'm no longer in trying to defend myself, debate myself. And I said, have you noticed that too? And she goes, now that you mention it, yeah, that's true. So
Hmm.
I'm opening that door, and then I'm getting to this sense of in my nervous system, it's like, oh, I'm not enough right now. And when I communicate that, then there's nothing to fight anymore. There's not even an external problem anymore. It's like, oh, I've reached the deeper truth of like what the fear is really about. And I can now reestablish, right, the connection to myself, right? And it happens naturally. And that's the part that I think is challenging because it cannot happen mentally. It happens in a physical sensation in the body. And when we reach that place, we're immediately feeling relief. It's not like we don't need. I've recently I've been doing a lot of these weekend adventure in Aviv Levi because it's like people are asking for it. They're reading the book and they're going like, and so the last intensive we just did, I role model a couple, and I said to one of the partner was explaining a problem, what she was really upset about, and then I asked the men just to listen, right, to just breathe and listen. And then when the woman was done, I asked the men to turn facing me, and I said, I'm going to respond as if I was you. Okay, I want you to pretend to be her now, and I'm going to respond as if I was you, but if I was completely vulnerable. I'm not going to debate about what she said or the topic or whatever. And I started saying, I'm scared. And I could see, like, as soon as I said that, there was tears coming out of his eyes. And then I said, I just feel like somehow I'm not enough. And I could feel emotion coming up, and everybody in the room could feel it, and he's feeling it. And the woman just said, I can't believe this. And I said, what's happening? And she said, I don't even care about the problem I brought up anymore. And so it like we don't realize that the emotional connection just eliminates, I mean, most of the conflict that we're having, because
Yeah.
that's the real place of the conflict is emotional. It isn't analytical. And once we have emotional connection to our own emotional body and with the other person, we can resolve anything. We can talk about anything. We can resolve some of the biggest problems we've had in our lives without much effort, really, you
Right.
know?
Yeah. It's like we're so used to having this hard exterior on and holding everything in. It's like, you share that. It's like, just picture that like person just melting, like letting the guard down and like letting people in. It's amazing like how therapeutic that is in a way to just acknowledge what your emotions are. And I think we get so used to resisting them or suppressing them. It's like that freedom to feel like you can feel whatever you're feeling and that's your truth. I
It's
absolutely love that.
liberating. It's
Yeah.
liberating to experience being ourselves
hmm
truly without condition,
hmm
without an agenda,
Yeah.
without, and our partner, here's the thing that's beautiful. I noticed my partner completely changed when I began to really do this regularly,
hmm
where suddenly it's like they immediately experience the relief with you.
hmm
That's what's so beautiful. In so many couples, the thought says, why should I be vulnerable first?
hmm
They're not doing it,
hmm
right? So it's one of the reasons why it takes courage. And it's like, I would answer by saying, do you want connection? Do you really want connection? Or do you want to keep perpetuating disconnection? And in the first door that I talk about in the book, I describe how when you take a pause and you're about to react,
hmm
take a moment to say, let's say your partner's frustrated with you, and your answer is going to be the words that are going to come out of your mouth are, yeah, well, I've worked really hard all day too.
hmm
Okay. Let's say you say that. Before you say it, can you actually know where this is going?
hmm Yeah. You can usually predict that pretty easily.
So
Yep.
there's no
Yeah.
doubt, right? And so
Mhm.
what we can see is if we pay attention to our thoughts and the result of our thoughts, it can be known before it even happens because we've lived it so many times before. We have been reactive in the past, so we know where it's going. And so this is part of the first consciousness, the first door is noticing that this narrative is going to create disconnection without a shadow of a doubt.
Mhm.
And so this invites us to pause now because then we can really say to ourselves, is that what I want? Do
Mm-hmm.
I want another debate? Do I want another disconnection with the person that I love the most? Is that where I want it to go?
Mm-hmm.
And you see
Yeah.
how it's a conscious choice,
Mhm.
and it opens the door towards, okay, that's not where the issue is. The issue exists in my nervous system, in my emotional body. Let me pause, let me breathe. I'll be back. And it's
Mhm.
really important to say that to your partner. I'll be back. This is not a
Yeah.
stonewalling process, right?
Mhm.
This is not avoiding the situation. It's on the contrary. I
Mhm.
used to believe that early on in my marriage, it destroyed so
Mhm.
much of our relationship because I
Mhm.
believed that if I walked out of a conflict, that somehow it meant that I didn't care. But it
Mhm.
really isn't. It can be done with caring and with
Yeah.
consciousness. And what it's actually doing is preventing us from being reactive,
Mhm.
right?
Absolutely. Going off of that, can you talk about door number two a little bit more? Because if you're someone who has like maybe shut down and like very out of touch with how you feel, your body, and how do you start to process it? I know, like, just reading that, it's like that discomfort that comes in and just getting through it till you get to three. But can you talk about what that looks like a little bit more for someone who feels like, okay, how do I do that? How do I actually connect with my body and the feelings?
Yeah. It's really door number two is the
Mhm.
hardest of them all because
Mhm.
no one has modeled attuning to our emotional body.
Mhm.
So, meaning when I'm about to say to my partner, where I've worked hard all day too, the emotion is anger.
Mhm.
Okay. But that emotion is a reactive emotion that's following a thinking process.
Mhm.
Okay. So we have confused reactive emotion with thinking that emotions are bad because of that.
Mhm.
Right. So
Mhm.
nobody wants an angry person because angry people are reactive and they're blaming. So, of course, that makes sense. I would say, yeah, I agree with you. I don't want a reactive emotion blowing in my face.
Mhm.
Stonewalling is the same thing. It's a inward emotion that's not being expressed, but it's still anger, right? Even people who just are hysteric with their emotion all the time, that's not a good model for emotions either.
Mhm.
So it's important to first understand that reactive emotions are not emotional attunement. They're
Mhm.
just that. They're just us reacting. Okay.
Mhm.
So door number two is pausing those reactive emotion. Door number one is pausing
Mhm.
those reactive emotion. And door two now is going for the deeper emotion that exists in the body
Mhm.
and to come to understanding that that emotion is related to our sense of belonging. It
Mhm.
isn't, it really isn't about anything else. It's like, and it takes a little bit because the mind won't want to believe that, right? I say that several times in the book. I
Mhm.
go, yeah, your mind's not going to want to believe that because
Yep.
it's got too many reasons to think that the real problem is out there. It's other people, it's the situation, and we can describe it so well. And in reality, we have to raise our consciousness that at the emotional body level, our nervous system doesn't care what we think.
Mhm.
It's just in a moment of distress. It's like the nervous system in that moment when we're triggered is like in the grocery store without their parents looking
Mhm.
around going, do I belong here? Am I safe? Am I
Mhm.
okay?
Mhm.
And to me, this is emotional intelligence. It's the consciousness that there's nothing to debate. There's nothing that my mind can do to resolve this. It's not going to happen.
Mhm.
And so at that point, we can really start moving more and more towards my experience matters. This is what door number two is about.
Mhm.
Everything that I'm feeling, even that reactive emotion to begin with, I give it okayness. I say, that's fine. I understand. And keep going. There's another one that's underneath that. And
Mhm.
usually I ask people to say to themselves, I'm scared. And
Mhm.
just like repeat that a few times and breathe. And
Mhm.
your body will tell you what it's scared of. You don't need to figure anything out. You're attuning now. You're saying, hey, you know what? You matter. You matter to me. Your experience is important. I
Mhm.
want to know what you're scared of. What are you scared of? And then now we're approaching a real live experience of this sense that our belonging is in danger. And it's so not logical. I think
Mhm.
that's the part that's the hardest about
Yeah.
attuning, right?
Mhm.
So it takes the other aspect of it is that one of the things that blocks us from attuning to our emotional body is that the thought that we have about emotion is that emotions are dangerous or that emotions will lead us astray, that they'll destroy our lives. Well, that's true about reactive emotion, but it's not true about attuning to this deep fear that my sense of love and value is in danger.
Mhm.
And giving that attention and permission, as soon as we touch it, there's a relief that happens. It's kind
Mhm.
of like almost immediate, you know. Let me give you an example of how I believe true attunement manifests in the body, okay?
Mhm.
So I remember one time I'm leaving for Europe for 2 months to I had a series of workshop I was leading in Switzerland, and so I knew I was going to be gone for 2 months, not see my family, my children, my dog. And I get on the airplane and I start walking down the aisle, and I just feel this crazy amount of reactive grief, like
Mhm.
just, and I start crying. And my reaction is like, oh, don't do that. You're in an airplane. People are going to see you crying. And then I just go, no, no, it's okay. And so now I go into the experience, I sit in my seat, and I start sobbing. And I just cry. And as I'm crying, I can hear all the thoughts that are saying, you see, you're really not okay. Why are you doing this? You're going away from your family, you're abandoning them, whatever judgment, all this stuff comes up,
Mhm.
and I'm crying. And as I sit with it and I go deeper, I realize that the great fear underneath that, right, was that I wasn't a good father. I wasn't a good husband. I wasn't, I didn't know that was even there, right?
Mhm.
And it comes up. And as I just keep breathing, I start feeling this immense love.
Mhm.
Like I realize that I wasn't even with them and I was already missing them. I was already experiencing. So through all this like contortion of reactive emotions and beliefs and all this stuff, underneath what naturally comes out of emotional attunement is back to our own innate love and value and sense of resilience and courage that already exists there. And we get there by letting these emotions have their way through us. Emotions are made, they're vibrational, they're made to be experienced, and they make their way through our body. And what we're left with on the other side of that emotion making its way through is our sense of love and value is intact. It's there.
Mhm.
And I
Mhm.
knew without a shadow of a doubt afterwards that I was an incredibly loving father because I
Mhm.
was experiencing this love right in the moment as I'm sitting on this airplane. And I couldn't define myself anymore by going away for 2 months defines me as a man. I
Mhm.
couldn't do that anymore. And I was
Mhm.
okay. Right.
Yeah.
So emotional attunement is the most profound intelligence that I believe we possess. And
Mhm.
we've been robbed of that intelligence because we've been conditioned to think that our emotions are something to fear, right?
Mhm. Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. Such a relatable example. And just understanding like you have to go through some of those things, but to realize what the truth is and that we are loved and valued and but it's all those things that shroud that truth within us. And so it's recognizing. I appreciate you sharing that because what a gift to someone who maybe can very much relate to everything you just said and hasn't gone through that process to get to the other side yet and now has some kind of framework to do that, to realize that what the actual truth is versus what maybe they thought was the truth, which was maybe their thoughts. And so that's such a gift to so many people who maybe are getting that seed planted in their mind right now to realize like what is real and what's the truth. So
Yeah,
thank
and
you.
I would add, one thing that I think is important to think about. I think we know intellectually, but I don't think we really take enough time to check in with ourselves and ask,
Mhm.
would you rather have friends and relationships in your life that are based on these false belonging habits, these behaviors of seeking acceptance based on what you think you should be?
Mhm.
Or would you rather be in relationship with someone who, when you're down for the count and you share that you're down for the count, that person is there, right?
Mhm.
What is connection truly, you know?
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
I really love the idea that connection is the friend that calls you,
Mhm.
right? When they're
Mhm.
down, right?
Mhm.
I mean, that's the biggest compliment you can ever receive from anybody, right?
Mhm.
That, and it's not, I mean, I wouldn't even call it a compliment. I would call it a deep truth that they deeply feel connected, safe, and
Mhm.
they feel like they can be themselves with you.
Mhm.
Ultimately, I believe that every single one of us wants that.
Mhm.
Every single human being wants
Mhm.
to experience that they're okay just the way they are. And
Yeah.
in order to do that, we have to move away from believing that we can ever be a behavior.
Mhm.
That's the biggest confusion. We can make mistakes, we can behave in all kinds of ways, but that can never define us, right?
Mhm.
We are much more than a behavior. We've been brainwashed to think that we are our behaviors. And yes, our behaviors impact others, that's for sure, and it impacts us,
Mhm.
but it doesn't define. You know, if I was to ask you, have you ever yelled at your partner? Well, most people would say, yeah, I have, right?
Mhm.
And at the same time, if I say, do you love your kids? Do you love your husband? Do you love your partner? Do you love your dog? And
Mhm.
you say yes, well, is the fact that you yelled at your partner, does that eliminate the loving person?
Mhm.
Can
Yeah.
you ever eliminate the loving person by losing your temper?
Mhm.
No.
Yeah. No. Mm-mm. Yeah.
Well,
That's
we do get confused about that, you know?
yeah. Well, yeah, the guilt, you do one wrong thing and then you're like, oh, who am I? Or you question yourself. And yeah, I mean, it's like when you frame it like that, you're like, oh yeah, of course not. It makes so much
Yeah.
sense. You can see it clearly. And I think sometimes we get in our heads and it's hard to see that within ourselves. Yeah,
Yeah.
as you're speaking, I have one last question I just want to ask you because it just came to me as you were speaking there. But for somebody who maybe has lived with these false belonging habits and has formed a group of people around them who resonate with them because they're living with these false belief habits, and now they start to attune to themselves and they see some of these relationships kind of falling off because they weren't built on a solid foundation. How do they navigate that? Because there's a lot of grief, and it can also maybe make them feel like they're doing something wrong because their external world is changing.
Mm. Yeah, that's really important. And it comes down to self-love, right?
Mhm.
To be able to, oftentimes, I think this is this false belonging habit of self-neglect, right? So if
Mhm.
you've been in a relationship that is not really conducive to receiving back, that it's just one-sided, and you know that it's no longer the right relationships to be involved in, um, it's probably, I mean, initially it's extremely challenging, and it'll be challenging because it's it appears that it can put in danger the loving person that you are towards other people,
Mhm.
because there needs to be a shift towards loving you, attending to how you're feeling, attending to what you need to do to
Mhm.
feel like whole without having to constantly take care of other people and be there for others, you know?
Mhm.
So I would say, and I say this to my clients at all these workshops as well that I lead, is we need to begin to understand that we have a certain amount of self-hatred because we correct ourselves all the time.
Mhm.
And love does not function that way.
Mhm.
So we need to shift into a compassionate approach towards that I can make mistakes. I can attempt to change my life, but it's not going to be like, oh, suddenly I'm not eating ice cream anymore. right?
Mhm.
It's like that's never an approach. That's again a corrective approach,
Mhm.
right? The approach of success is I know I have a tendency to want to eat ice cream, okay? And I want to learn this process of eating differently. So, okay, so how am I going to do that? Well, I'm going to start by tuning into myself, tuning into my emotions, tuning into what's happening. And sometimes I'll succeed and then I'll realize that I don't need the ice cream at all. And sometimes I'll just go to the ice cream. But
Mhm.
it's not like a black and white. Black and white is the mind, the way it operates.
Yeah.
Emotionally, intelligence is a fluidity process. It's allowing things to unfold and allowing mistakes to happen over
Mhm.
and over again. That's okay. But seeking relational connection to our emotional body and to other people, we
Mhm.
have to learn to trust that that will eventually be our default way of operating. It just will because it feels too good. And
Mhm.
we do it once, and
Yeah.
then it took courage to do it. We were emotionally connected. We had this breakthrough. We walked through the three doors, and now there's something strong inside of us that goes, "Oh, wow, that was so much better." Right? That
Yeah.
feels so much better. And that's how we build it. That's how
Yeah.
we continue to create a different way and shed those false belonging habits.
I love it. Thank you so much. That's just really beneficial for so many people who maybe are struggling with this right now, or like, okay, but how do I do it? And so that gives so much clarity. And I appreciate so much of what you shared today. And I really recommend anyone listening go read the book because it was really so good and transformational. So thank you so much for being here. And for someone who wants to connect with you, get the book, where can they find you?
Great. Well, the first thing is it's on Amazon. So Aviv La Vie, An Adventure in Belonging. And there's the audiobook's going to come out here real soon. So there's the 3 version Kindle and the print version. So I really recommend starting there. And all of our information is in the book as well. There's avivlavie.com. So it's AVIVELAVIE.com. That's our website. And so we offer the weekend adventure that people can take. Highly recommend that. It's very transformational. We have online groups as well that people can join. And so there's a lot of resources that we're also building. Our goal is to create communities and create pods where people can actually practice this way of living, of prioritizing connection first. And so that they can, we have these groups where we do a 3-month process with these groups, and then they continue on their own. And then we support them in the process if they have difficulty or challenges. So lots of resources to practice and live this.
I love it. And I'll put everything in the show notes for anyone listening. Definitely check that out. And I love the idea of the community. What an awesome thing. Because I'm like reading the book I said, I'm like, oh, I want to be part of that. That's so cool. So thank you so much again. And I'm just really appreciate everything you shared today. And I know it's going to help somebody. So thank you again. And thank you for everyone who tuned in today.
Thank you for having me, Kelly.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Rewiring Health. I hope you found our conversation both enlightening and empowering. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to Rewiring Health so that you never miss an update. Also, I would love to hear your thoughts. If you could take a moment to rate and review the show, it would mean the world to me and help others discover the power that we all have within us to create change and create the life that we truly, truly desire. Thank you so much for spending your precious time with me and sharing the energy of the show.